unbelievable video.
It's horrifying.
Why would someone do this? Why didn't they even stop?
It was really bad. I did not recognize myself.
No, she could have been paralyzed or even dead.
And it leads to a demand for answers.
They want that driver to come forward.
There was a lot of anger.
And later, another chilling crime.
It happened so quickly, they didn't even have time to react.
Also ignites fury.
We're talking about little old ladies.
This mugshot was the man who took a woman's purse and then nearly ran her over.
July 3rd, 2021, Lincoln, Nebraska. A July 4th party ends in terror.
An annual 3rd of July party that would soon descend into chaos.
Happened in a split second. We couldn't even see.
The day begins simply enough. An annual cookout for close friends and family. 21-year-old Amelia Graham invites everyone to her home and pays for it all.
Amelia, she's very down to earth and loving, a caring and generous person.
It's my favorite holiday. We always have a barbecue.
It was a full-on party, at least 100 people. The atmosphere was super fun.
Traditionally, the annual party ends with a fireworks show in the street, where everyone takes turns putting on a show.
All my friends bring their own. Personally, I do like just lighting them off myself because it's like, oh, I lit that one off, you guys.
A lot of the kids obviously couldn't wait their turns. So, moms or dads would walk their kids out to the street and, light the firework with them.
Still, everyone is aware of the potential danger.
There's a lot of trees around here. That's a fire hazard. So we do light them off in the streets.
And although setting off fireworks in an active street is technically illegal in Nebraska, it's not unusual to see during the holiday.
We have never had any issues with any vehicle. Sometimes they honk.
A lot of the cars who were going through the block were waiting for the fireworks to be done and then driving.
Before Amelia begins her fireworks show, a friend lights something known as a fountain.
It's like an overgrown sparkler. It's a shower of sparks and bright light.
It's almost blinding, and when it goes off, something horrifying happens.
I was in the middle of the driveway, and I just see a flash of light come out of my right eye.
It's so shocking, it takes a moment to realize that a car has slammed into someone. And it's Amelia.
I turned my eyes for a split second, and I just saw a body flying up into the air. She was standing in the middle of the street, and her body ends up on the curbside. I instantly called 911.
911 operator.
Amelia is severely injured.
She was bleeding from the head, the nose. I was terrified. It was gushing out of her mouth onto the street. I was scared.
Adania's friends and family are in a complete panic.
My sister is literally pulling her hair out. And Amelia's mom was screaming. She was crying.
Whoever did this to Amelia, they didn't even slow down to see what happened.
We all were yelling, why would someone do this? Why didn't they even stop after they hit her? The car went through the four-way stop, blowing through about 40 miles per hour.
Was this a horrible accident, or was Amelia targeted on purpose?
You would hope that it was not the intent of the driver to strike the pedestrian. They did. Some kind of deliberate act.
I was so in shock. It could have been anyone.
It all happened so quickly, nobody sees the driver or the license plate.
It was a black Chevy Impala. We didn't know who it was.
And Amelia is in bad shape.
She was unconscious. I was trying to talk to her.
With an ambulance racing to the scene, Adania tries to stay calm as she relays information to 911.
I just felt, completely sick to my stomach. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating. They asked me if she was still conscious and still breathing.
Everyone is terrified Amelia won't make it. But then she opens her eyes.
I was just kind of laying there. I was trying to get up. I couldn't get up.
She got a concussion from slamming onto the concrete. She skid across the street.
Amelia is rushed to the hospital.
I had to have surgery on my collarbone and they had to put a plate in it. I did have really bad road rash all over my body. My hands were all scabbed and stuff. It was fairly bad. I did not recognize myself. My face means a lot to me. And then for it to just get completely destroyed, I was scared of myself, actually.
But she's lucky it isn't worse.
She could have been paralyzed, brain dead, or even dead.
Who ran her down? And why were they in such a hurry to get away?
I was just lighting a firework. I did see the car approaching, I put my hands up, like, stop. It was pretty terrifying. I was hit in the front and then I kind of just rolled. I just got knocked out.
At the scene, police interview eyewitnesses and gather physical evidence.
The suspect vehicle struck a parked car, leaving a transfer of black paint. The suspect's vehicle mirror broke off. Collecting that mirror, preserving that paint could be crucial.
Still, police tell Amelia and her family that they don't have much to go on.
There was a lot of anger in my house. Everyone was just kind of upset.
So friends and family take matters into their own hands, knocking on neighbors' doors to find out if anyone has video from that night.
The neighbors across the street had a doorbell with a camera.
Then they release that video to the media in hopes of catching whoever is behind the wheel.
Tonight, a 21-year-old Lincoln woman is left with unanswered questions and severe injuries.
Unbelievable video of a hit and run and the victim talking to Channel 8.
I wouldn't wish this on anybody, like at all.
The footage sparks immediate outrage.
They want that driver to come forward.
And just 2 days after the video goes viral, 22-year-old Isabel Knapp Cuevas tells police that she may have been involved, but claims she thought she hit a firework, not a person. Amelia's family is furious.
Anyone in their right mind would know that that kind of impact would have not been a firework.
None of us are buying it. When you hit a rock, you see it hit your windshield. If you hit a person, it would be hard to not see it. I did hit her windshield.
Big difference between hitting a firework and hitting a human being.
Police match the paint residue in the broken side mirror found at the scene to the black Chevy Impala that Isabel drives. They also discover something else. Her license is revoked for a past DUI.
While you're on the suspended list, your driving privileges are suspended and you're not allowed to be driving the vehicle.
And that explains why she fled in a panic.
The entire thing is exacerbated if there is personal injury involved while you're operating a vehicle while you're revoked.
Isabel is charged with leaving the scene of an injury accident, property damage, no vehicle registration, a stop sign violation, and driving while her license was revoked.
I do not believe she would have turned herself in if there wasn't anything posted on social media.
She knew that she was just going to get caught based on how many people were sharing and commenting on the video.
Not all of the reaction to the video is positive.
Why were you in the street? You saw that there were cars coming. You shouldn't be lighting fireworks off.
But the majority of the comments have been sympathetic.
You're lucky to be alive. We're very thankful God was there watching over you. You're going to be okay. It meant a lot to me knowing that there's still a lot of good people out there like that.
Amelia still isn't fully healed and suffers from memory loss.
Her recovery was super tough. She couldn't do basic things. She always needed assistance for everything.
It's a process to put myself back together. I think overall I'm doing a pretty good job at it. But for me, I want to move past it as fast as possible.
Moving past it includes not harboring anger towards the woman who caused her pain.
I don't really have any hate towards her or anything like that. I just kind of would want to know why she didn't stop or even try to slow down or why she didn't see if I was okay.
The one thing that does make Amelia sad is that for her, the 4th of July will never be the same.
It just sucks. You know, I will never be able to enjoy it again. I don't believe I will ever light a fireworks, actually.
But she knows that's a small price to pay.
The lessons I've learned, never to stand in the street again. I look at it as I have another chance. I'm not going to let it stop me.
In Florida, another disturbing crime takes a dark turn that no one saw coming. December 6th, 2018, Okeechobee, Florida. It's about 8 p.m. A craving for fast food takes a horrifying turn for a grandmother out on the town.
A robbery that happened in a flash was all caught on camera. Tonight, the thief is still on the run.
I had no idea that anybody would even do something like that. I guess it shocked me.
That night, after decorating their church with Christmas decorations, 76-year-old Janice Allen treats her friend, Miss Willie, to a fast food meal.
So these are obviously good ladies, good Samaritans out doing good deeds in their community.
Miss Willie and I are pals. We go everywhere together. We sit next to the door at the back.
What they don't realize is there's a mysterious man in the parking lot outside. He is watching Miss Willie and Janice through the restaurant window, and then comes inside.
All of a sudden, we see a tall, slender, white-haired man enter from the bottom of the screen.
Janice had her back to the man.
He came out of nowhere. Miss Willie was reaching for a nugget, I think, and she just looked up and said, "He's got your purse."
At first, the women don't quite grasp what's happening.
Their belief is suspended. They don't want to believe that they either were about to be or, in fact, became victims of a crime.
It happened so quickly, they didn't even have time to react.
But it only takes a few moments to realize they've just been robbed, and Janice isn't having it.
And it was just like, wow. I just jumped up and went after him.
He bolts for the door. And I'm very impressed with her instinct. She takes off running after this man out the door. She's got this like long flowing cloak, kind of feeling like Little Red Riding Hood vibe.
He was very swift. I mean, he had long legs, and I've got very short legs.
Janice is in hot pursuit as the suspect dashes to his getaway car.
I was behind him. He went right to the car, maybe 6, 7 feet, not very far.
She sees the man get in a silver SUV. She doesn't stop and scream for help. She doesn't yell at him. She doesn't pound on the hood of the car. Oh no, she actually reaches for the driver's side door.
He opened the door and he started to close it while I grabbed the handle.
Her reaction was to open the door and basically physically go inside the car, reach inside the car to recover her purse.
For a 76-year-old woman, this is a bold move.
I did not see his face. All I can remember is he flipped the purse. There must have been somebody else in the car.
The panicked suspect throws the purse to a woman who is sitting in the passenger seat.
This guy's thinking he's gonna make a clean getaway, but he must have been completely dumbfounded when he looks over and sees this woman coming after her purse.
Then the thief hits the gas. And that's when something terrible happens.
He started to back up, and I was still holding onto the door, and it flung me under. My head is what hit that cement.
It's a terrifying moment. Janice is dragged across the pavement of this parking lot. It's a very tough thing to watch. You can definitely tell she's very, very close to the tires of this fast-moving car, and you can actually see her shoe fall off at the end where the car runs over her foot.
He ran over my elbow and my ankle on my right side.
Janice is knocked unconscious, and for a moment, her attacker hesitates.
He has a clear line of sight to see this woman laid out on the pavement, obviously in pain. You can still see the passenger of this car and the driver. The interior lights are on. They're not reacting. He hesitates for just maybe a split second, but then after that, he's out of there lickety-split. Zero compassion.
Shocked bystanders and Janice's friend, Miss Willie, all run to her side. One woman frantically dials for help. This is serious. Janice is slipping in and out of consciousness, and the trauma to her head is severe.
I can remember Miss Willie saying, "Don't move her, don't move her." I don't remember anything else.
Who would do this, and why?
Well, we're talking about little old ladies. They're in their 70s. They just finished volunteering at their church, and this guy, this scumbag, chooses them.
In the hospital, doctors keep Janice under close observation due to swelling on the brain.
It's your brain, and it has no place to go. And it's very, very painful.
Everyone is baffled by the callous crime.
Of all the people this guy could have targeted this day, this may be the most cruel.
But police have little to go on.
They don't really have a clear image of the suspect. They don't have a clear license plate. All of those things creates a very difficult task for law enforcement in locating and apprehending the suspect.
Whoever the suspect is, he is in serious trouble.
Not only when the vehicle strikes Janice does it go from theft to robbery, but now a whole new offense is created, and that is a hit and run.
And all of it was for a shockingly small reward.
Only $4 in cash in the purse. Keys, credit cards, identification, all of that, all except the $4, was left in a parking lot nearby.
The one thing police do know is that this man seems to be a serial purse robber.
As it turns out, this was not this guy's first attempt. There were 2 other victims that he attempted to rob earlier the day, but he was never apprehended.
In an attempt to generate leads, police released the video to the media, and the story goes viral overnight.
Breaking news now, an elderly woman in the hospital tonight after she was nearly run over by a car.
'Tis a season for crimes of opportunity.
The grandmother was eating a Happy Meal when her handbag was stolen.
I was raised to always respect my elders. So watching something like this for me is deeply disturbing. This is not only disrespecting someone in the older generation, this is actually a violent assault against one of them caught on camera.
After 3 days, Janice is released from the hospital. There's a lingering threat of a dangerous blood clot developing near her brain, but her elbow and ankle, which the thief ran over, didn't break.
And they were all black and blue for a long, long time. Very badly bruised.
But not long after she gets home, there's some good news. The suspect has turned himself in.
All new this morning, this mugshot just into our newsroom of the man who deputies say took a woman's purse and then nearly ran her over.
This purse snatcher's sister sees the videos floating around Facebook. She knows it's him, and she convinces him to turn himself in.
His humanity, for whatever reason, surfaces.
I think he was afraid. He was fearful of what would happen if he did not turn himself in and he got caught.
Authorities charge 50-year-old Charles Alton Stratton Jr. with aggravated battery, robbery, and grand theft. His excuse for the violent attack?
According to police, Stratton told them that he was, quote, jonesing for some crack cocaine. That's why he stole the purse.
He was on drugs, and he wanted money for drugs.
On social media, there's intense outrage. But not everyone is kind to Janice.
People said that was a stupid thing to do. Well, maybe it was. My great-grandson, he's 7, and he said, I saw that, Grandma. What were you doing?
Probably not the smartest decision, but who are we to judge?
A year later, Stratton is sentenced to 15 years in prison. Janice wants to see her attacker in person, so she goes to court. But surprisingly, she feels sorry for him.
We're all sinners. We all make mistakes. He apologized. He was really sorry. He could not come up to me. He was over there with chains on, and I says, I forgive you. And he bowed his head and said, "Thank you."
And that kind of makes sense. We know that Janice is a member of the Christian faith. We know that she values things like forgiveness. And honestly, I've got a lot of respect for this take because I'm not sure I would have the same approach.
Still, Janice says if it happened again, she'd do things differently.
People do not realize the danger that is around us.
A purse is not worth your life. Stuff can be replaced, you can't.
Janice is still in therapy and suffers from dizzy spells and memory loss. But her sunny attitude never changes.
I know the Lord has a plan for all of us. I think he left me here for a reason. He wasn't finished with me yet.
Meet the Inchworm Bandits.
These thieves think they're clever.
This looks like an action movie.
But there's one thing they forgot.
They made a serious miscalculation about where the surveillance camera was pointing.
And later, a disturbing holiday crime.
It's awful. A family pet was snatched from outside of a deli.
There are rings that operate to steal certain kinds of dogs.
But neighbors band together to find him.
The social media reaction goes around like a wildfire.
I really didn't think I'd see him again.
Houston police still need your help to find a gang of criminals who may be responsible for more than a dozen burglaries.
Thieves targeting 2 other businesses in this area. They broke in through this window.
November 19th, 2018. The Timberwood area of Houston, Texas. 3 a.m. A brazen burglary is underway at a pizza restaurant.
They started smashing the glass with a crowbar. Then they climbed in.
This is breaking and entering 101.
That they've got their hoods up, they're wearing gloves, they're covered in head to toe, just trying to keep their identities concealed.
And these burglars have a unique technique. Get down low, crawl, then roll.
So we have motion detectors, and they're part of the alarm. And that's probably why they were rolling around in the restaurant.
This looks like an action movie.
Like there's a laser beam that's going to touch them and the alarm's going to go off and the bars are going to shut down on top of them if they trigger the alarm.
They could also be, afraid of other like infrared cameras seeing them.
The thieves have either forgotten or maybe they just don't care, but the cameras are recording their every move.
And they head straight for the safe.
They knew directly where to go and how to get there. These guys were very prepared.
If they know someone's not in the area and it's worth the risk for them, they're gonna take it.
And with an assortment of tools ready, they immediately get to work.
They look around and they ransack. They're looking for anything that's of value. They smashed the safe with a crowbar, sledgehammer, anything they had.
These thieves cannot pry the safe open. They're beating the heck out of it, trying to get inside. And then at one point, we see one of them pull out their cell phone. They seem to be calling for help.
After about 30 minutes, they finally give up.
So even though they weren't able to open up the safe and get the money that they were looking for, they didn't want to leave empty-handed.
They did take my boombox, my drill, and my flashlight.
Their most baffling haul? Some children's toys.
A bunch of stuffed animals and things from the game room.
Then, crawling out the same way they came in, the thieves disappear into the night. Jesse learns about the theft when he arrives to open up a few hours later.
When we got to the store, we checked the cameras. We noticed they crawled around all over the restaurant to try to find the money.
Thankfully, the $2,000 that was locked in the safe remains untouched, but these bandits have caused another $2,000 in property damage for Jesse.
Well, these burglars, they need to be caught. They're a nuisance. They're a plague.
Angry, Jesse takes the video from the cameras he installed only 6 months earlier to the local news.
3 thieves rolling across the floor of a Mr. Gatti's restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, they came over here with a crowbar and they sat there and smashed it about 20 times. These guys watch too much TV, too many movies.
The crooks are mocked for not thinking about the security cameras.
They made a serious miscalculation about where the surveillance camera was pointing.
And they get a catchy name.
Meet the Inchworm Bandits. Huh.
The Inchworm Bandits.
The staff is actually taken to calling them the Inchworm Bandits.
It really just nods back to the fact of the movements that they were doing across the restaurant to try to keep low and do this really quietly. And it's also a catchy name.
Both police and the media soon realized that the same Inchworm crew is caught on multiple surveillance cameras, committing multiple burglaries.
It's just a style that seems to be happening all the time now. There's an audible alarm. They'll back away. They'll wait a little while, see if the police show up right away. If not, they start with crawling on the ground as slowly as possible.
I mean, they're inchworming their way across my dining room floor.
They like to hit the same type of establishments.
All these businesses are set up the exact same, so they know exactly where to go. Typically, it's like the manager's office or the cashier, the cash machines, the registers behind the counters.
And whoever they are, they're extremely well organized.
They'll have lookouts. You'll see a cell phone lit up or on speaker. They're getting intel from outside. And so they know exactly how much time they have.
Jesse pleads with the band of bandits to stay away from small business owners.
I don't know. These guys need to get a life. They need something to do. Leave us alone. Get a job. Get to work. Everybody else in the area works hard. Why can't they?
And he hopes the public mocking will stop them.
They'll be too embarrassed to come out again.
But these thieves have other plans.
Wait for it. Jesse gets hit again. The bandits return, and this time...
they grind the safe open.
Incredibly, 1 year after brazen robbers hit Jesse's restaurant, they come back to steal from him again.
You know, there's so much work out there, but these guys, they feel it's easier to just go out and rob from people like me. They bring in bigger tools.
They came prepared. They even had a grinder to cut open the safe.
They bring these power tools that are battery operated that will cut just as fast as anything else. They bring extra blades. They bring extra power tools, extra batteries, because they know how long it takes typically to get into these safes.
This time, they managed to get away with $3,000 cash.
Some of it was tips for servers. I know for certain it was the same guys. It was the same Inchworm Bandits that did it.
Jesse is stunned that the bold bandits had the nerve to hit him again.
We have motion sensors. We have glass breaks. We have a 24-hour monitoring, but the alarm system didn't work. You pay for a sense of protection, and these guys, they violated it.
The robbers continue to hit one restaurant after another, and they're especially fond of fast food chains.
Popeyes, chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Church's, Taco Bell's, Pizza Hut's. Anywhere where they know where those safes are at, they're hitting those locations.
I think it's highly organized. These guys are probably a crew of 15 of them that do it.
Police say the Inchworm Bandits have likely committed hundreds of robberies.
Thieves are targeting their pizza shops and neighboring businesses.
Thieves took nearly $6,000 from the 3 pizzerias.
And they believe it's part of a coordinated gang effort, where they'll just take the safe if they can't crack it.
These crews are coming from a lot of gangs. Some of these gangs are working together where typically they wouldn't. They want to go make some money.
The one thing that unites all gangs? Money. And cash will make you do some strange things, like doing the inchworm at 3 a.m. at a pizza parlor with your boys.
A lot of those restaurants, they typically don't do the money drop. They have the safes there that they drop the money into. The accessibility to the cash is there, so that's what they're looking to get. Just if it's $5,000, $3,000, $2,000, that's a good score for them.
I'm pretty upset about it. I wish these guys would get caught.
The video caught on Jesse's security cameras from the first burglary captures what appears to be a getaway car, a silver SUV. But police don't have much else to go on.
So unfortunately, we're often left with really grainy video. And this is a burglar's best friend.
A lot of the videos are poor quality, without some type of evidence left behind, cell phone, fingerprint, DNA evidence. it's very difficult to identify these suspects.
Even though there's a lot of talk online about these inchworm bandits being stupid or not just being the brightest criminals, at the end of the day, I think they actually did a pretty good job at their trade craft. That they take pretty great care in protecting their identities with wearing gloves, making sure they have baggy clothes on, keeping their hoods up and things like that. And also just hitting like local family businesses, knowing that these places probably don't have the money to equip some of this high-tech security.
This looks like nonsense, but it keeps on working.
These bandits seem to be fearless.
And unfortunately, because it's a nonviolent crime, the reality is those suspects aren't going to stay in jail or go to prison very long. There's consequences, but they're just not afraid of them.
These criminals may be getting away with it, but I'm not impressed until they start doing flips.
There's definitely an element to this where, you know, once you start to build up your confidence with committing a crime like this over and over, you definitely start to think that you're untouchable.
Some business owners are responding by putting their cash elsewhere.
We've had a lot of businesses start to leave their registers open and their registers on top of the counter, kind of to signify, hey, look, there's nothing in here.
The restaurants might as well hang a big sign in the window that says, "We take all our money home at night."
As for Jesse, he's decided the best solution is to look at the bright side of things. He and his staff now use that video of the inchworm bandits rolling across the restaurant floor as a source of endless entertainment.
We look back at it and we laugh. You know, getting only hit twice in the grand scheme of things isn't too bad.
These inchworm bandits, they're going to mess up, and we're going to be there and catch them when we can. We're always going to be looking for them.
In New York, another bold theft is also caught on camera. December 27th, 2020, New York City. It's the holiday season, and Columbia University professor Victoria De Grazia is enjoying some time with her beloved dog, Luca.
Luca's 7 years old. He's a long-haired dachshund. He now reaches maturity. He's quite calm. He's very sweet.
On this afternoon, Victoria isn't feeling well.
I was resting because I had a cold.
So her partner takes Luca for his walk. He stops at a deli and ties Luca to the outdoor fruit stand, something Victoria has done countless times before.
Sort of like a controlled situation. I usually would put him completely under the fruit stand so he wasn't even visible, to passers-by when I would take him out, and then never for more than 5 minutes.
In New York City, it's not uncommon to see dogs just tied up with their leash right outside of a store.
In this country, health and safety laws usually prohibit dog owners from bringing their dogs into restaurants or stores. Most of the time, nothing bad happens.
But this time, that's not the case.
When the boyfriend comes outside, the dog is gone. Luca wasn't left outside for hours. He was only outside for a matter of minutes.
Victoria's partner runs back into the store to ask for help. They call the police, who arrive within minutes.
Thankfully, the store had video.
And what's on the video shocks everyone.
The first thing that we see in this video is the dog is sitting under a produce section, waiting for his owner to come back.
And we see the suspect pet the dog, not really doing anything that to a passersby may seem out of the ordinary.
And the dog's accepting this man.
Then the suspect unties the dog's leash and he flees with the dog.
Police tell them that dog thefts are far more common than people realize.
There are rings that operate to steal certain kinds of dogs. Unfortunately for Luca, the kind of dog he is makes him a target for people who make possibly thousands of dollars in a sale after the theft.
When Victoria's partner tells her what happened, she's devastated.
Came in and he looked ghastly, and he said Luca was stolen. Began to cry, began to think these terrifying feelings, and then what to do. And I felt very bad for my partner because it could have been me.
It is very emotional. It's like losing somebody in your own family.
Luca's owner jumps into action to try to get him back.
We made him signs. Have you seen this dog? Please give us information. This is a family dog. Please return the dog as soon as you can. We love Luca.
The response is instant, and soon the whole neighborhood is looking for Luca.
Lots of people helping. Tack, 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 these signs all over. And the police, they also began to distribute flyers. And they put that onto the television.
Awful. A family pet was snatched from outside of a deli on the Upper West Side, and the owners are just devastated. The dog napper is apparently not very shy about the crime.
Why do you think someone would steal a dog?
Tens of thousands of people knew about this.
The story really starts to go viral. The social media reaction goes around like a wildfire. Even the NYPD 24th Precinct shares information about Luca on their Twitter account.
But police also warn Victoria that many stolen dogs are never recovered.
We were courting danger.
The potential for danger and the potential for death is certainly there.
As a whole city seems to fret about who has snatched Luca, tips pour in.
An avalanche of tips came in. Lots of people reported having maybe seen the suspect walking through the neighborhood. The reaction that occurred was incredible. Detectives, they worked into their caseload a tremendous effort to locate Luca.
Then, 3 days after Luca disappears, Victoria gets a surprising call.
From a woman in a little bottega, a little store. She said that Sunday night, the night Luca was stolen, a guy had come into her store with a dog and was trying to sell it to her.
The woman tells Victoria the man's behavior made her suspicious.
She said, I'm not interested, I have a dog. Besides, that dog looks to me like he was stolen. And he ran out. She saw him go into this next store.
The woman suspects that after he left her store and went to another one, the man found someone who was willing to buy the dog.
He went in and he came out with some money.
She's seen the news coverage about Luca and wants to help. So she sends Victoria images from her security camera.
I had looked at the email, and there was the guy with Luca in his arms.
Victoria immediately notifies the police.
They went and questioned the store owner where the dog was reportedly sold.
This store owner confirms that a man who came in that night did sell a dog to one of his customers. He tells police exactly where that person lives, so they head there to find out if the dog is indeed Luca. A few hours later, Victoria gets another call.
I really didn't think I'd see him again. I got a call. We have the dog, and we'll be bringing him home. His fur looked a little spiky. He was still sort of embarrassed looking and went and hid under the bed for several hours. And then the next day he was himself.
Thankfully for Victoria, Luca was recovered safely and they're able to be a happy family again.
Here he is, his little furry self. Very sweet. Yeah, you're sweet. Okay. There he is.
Just a few days after he's reunited with Victoria, authorities track down Luca's dog napper. He's charged with grand larceny. The person who he sold Luca to is not charged. And frightening as it all was, now everyone knows Luca as the dog-snatching survivor.
When we walk down the street, people say, "Is that the Luca? Is that the Luca?" You know, he's like a little celebrity.
For Victoria, the ordeal has renewed her faith in mankind.
It was quite an amazing 4 days of people responding and collaborating. It made you believe totally in humankind.
And it's a Christmas she'll never forget.
This truly was a post-Christmas miracle.
We were so heartbroken and we were so happy when he came back. It ended up being a nice Christmas story.
In the early hours of December 7th, 1991, a thin column of smoke rose quietly into the cold night sky above West Anderson Lane in Austin, Texas. The shopping center was nearly deserted. Most businesses had long since locked their doors, their lights extinguished, leaving only empty parking spaces illuminated by scattered street lamps. It should have been an ordinary Friday night giving way to another quiet weekend. Instead, within minutes, firefighters and police officers would walk into a scene that many seasoned investigators would later describe as one of the most horrifying crime scenes they had ever encountered. Inside a small frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, 4 teenage girls had been murdered. Their lives had ended in an act of violence so shocking that it would haunt an entire city for decades. The crime itself was devastating enough, but what followed proved almost as troubling. The investigation would stretch across more than 30 years. It would produce thousands of interviews, dozens of false leads, multiple confessions that later unraveled under scrutiny, wrongful prosecutions, overturned convictions, and countless unanswered questions. Only after advances in modern DNA technology would investigators identify a suspect whose name had never appeared during the original investigation. Yet even then, because that suspect had died years earlier, some of the most important questions surrounding the murders would remain unanswered. This is not simply the story of an unsolved crime. It is also the story of 4 ordinary young lives interrupted without warning, of families forced to endure decades of uncertainty, and of an investigation that became a lesson in both the limitations of forensic science and the consequences of pursuing justice without definitive evidence. To understand why this case continues to occupy a unique place in American criminal history, it is necessary to return to Austin as it existed in the early 1990s, before the tragedy forever changed the city. At that time, Austin was already growing rapidly, but still retained much of the character of a close-knit Texas community. Although known for its universities, live music, and expanding economy, it was generally considered a relatively peaceful place compared with many larger American cities. Families gathered at neighborhood restaurants, teenagers spent evenings at shopping centers, and local businesses often employed high school students working part-time after classes or on weekends. West Anderson Lane reflected that atmosphere. The commercial district attracted families, shoppers, and young people looking for casual places to spend their evenings. Restaurants, retail stores, and small businesses lined the area. creating a steady flow of customers throughout the day and into the evening. Among those businesses was a modest frozen yogurt shop named I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Like many similar stores during that era, it offered a bright, welcoming environment where customers could enjoy frozen yogurt with various toppings. It was not the sort of place anyone would associate with danger. Parents felt comfortable allowing their teenagers to work there, and customers rarely imagined that anything violent could occur inside its walls. On the evening of December 6, 1991, the shop appeared no different from any other Friday night. Employees served customers, cleaned tables, and prepared for closing. Outside, traffic gradually diminished as businesses prepared to end the workday. Nothing in those ordinary routines hinted that the store would soon become the setting for one of Texas's most infamous murder investigations. Working the closing shift that evening were two 17-year-old employees, Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas. Jennifer was nearing the end of her shift, completing the familiar responsibilities expected of employees before locking the doors for the night. Alongside her was Eliza, who shared those same closing duties. Their tasks were routine, cleaning equipment, organizing the shop, preparing the cash register, and making sure everything was ready for another business day. It was work they had likely performed many times before, and there was every reason to believe that this evening would end just as uneventfully as countless others. Jennifer was not alone that night. Her younger sister, Sarah Harbison, who was 15 years old, planned to meet her after work. Sarah was not an employee at the yogurt shop. She had simply come to wait for her older sister to finish closing so they could leave together. According to the available information, Sarah intended to spend the remainder of the evening with friends at a sleepover after Jennifer's shift ended. It was the kind of ordinary teenage plan that countless families make every weekend without giving it a second thought. Accompanying Sarah was her close friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. Amy had joined Sarah that evening and came to the yogurt shop while waiting for Jennifer to finish work. Like Sarah, Amy had no reason to believe the evening would become anything other than another ordinary night among friends. The youngest of the four girls, Amy represented the innocence that often stands out so painfully in tragedies involving young victims. She was simply spending time with her friend while waiting for an older sibling to finish a shift at work. The fourth victim, Eliza Thomas, was also 17 years old and worked alongside Jennifer. She shared responsibility for closing the store and was expected to finish her shift before heading home. There is nothing in the available evidence suggesting that either Jennifer or Eliza anticipated any unusual circumstances that evening. They were performing familiar responsibilities in a business located within a busy shopping area, surrounded by other stores that had operated normally throughout the day. What connected these four girls was not involvement in dangerous activities or association with criminal behavior. According to those who knew them, they were ordinary teenagers regarded positively by family members and friends. They had no known connections to organized crime, violent offenders, or any circumstances that would have placed them at exceptional risk. Their presence together inside the yogurt shop that night resulted entirely from routine plans. Two employees finishing work, a younger sister waiting to go home, and a friend accompanying her. In retrospect, those simple circumstances make the tragedy even more difficult to comprehend. There was no indication that the girls had been specifically targeted because of who they were. Nothing in the available information suggests they expected confrontation or danger. Their evening unfolded within the ordinary rhythm of teenage life: part-time work, meeting family, spending time with friends, and preparing for the weekend. As the hours passed, customers continued entering and leaving the store. The atmosphere remained typical of a business approaching closing time. Jennifer and Eliza continued cleaning and organizing the shop. Sarah and Amy waited for the shift to end. Outside, the shopping center gradually became quieter as neighboring businesses closed for the evening. Yet somewhere within those final hours, subtle events were beginning to unfold that investigators would spend decades attempting to understand. Witnesses would later describe seeing individuals inside the yogurt shop whose identities were never conclusively established. One man reportedly asked to use the restroom and remained there longer than expected. Later theories would suggest he might have opened or blocked the rear entrance to allow someone else access after closing, though investigators never proved that this occurred. Near the end of business hours, another witness recalled seeing two young men sitting inside the shop behaving in a manner that appeared unusual. Their identities were never confirmed, nor was it ever established whether they had any connection to the murders. At the time, however, no customer or passerby had reason to believe these observations would become critical pieces of one of the longest-running investigations in Austin's history. The yogurt shop was simply preparing to close, just as it had countless nights before. Within a short time, the doors would lock. The last customers would leave. The lights inside would remain on only long enough for employees to complete their work. What happened after that would transform an ordinary neighborhood business into the center of a criminal investigation that would span more than 3 decades, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a search for justice that would test both investigators and the families who refused to let the memories of 4 young girls fade into history. As the evening moved closer to 11 o'clock, the activity inside, "I can't believe it's yogurt," gradually slowed. The rush of customers that often accompanied a Friday night had largely disappeared, leaving Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas to focus on the familiar routine of closing the store. Like countless evenings before, they cleaned counters, organized supplies, checked the cash register, and prepared the equipment for the following day. Nothing about those final tasks suggested they were anything other than ordinary employees finishing another shift. Meanwhile, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison and her 13-year-old friend Amy Ayers waited patiently. Sarah had come to meet her older sister after work, and Amy had accompanied her. According to the available information, Sarah was looking forward to spending the rest of the night at a friend's sleepover once Jennifer finished closing. For the 2 younger girls, waiting inside the yogurt shop was simply the easiest way to pass the final minutes before they could all leave together. The atmosphere inside the store likely reflected the calm that usually settles over a business. Nearing the end of the day, outside, the shopping center was becoming noticeably quieter. Many nearby businesses had already closed their doors, and traffic through the parking lot was steadily decreasing. Streetlights cast long shadows across the nearly empty pavement, while only a handful of vehicles remained scattered throughout the lot. Nothing about the setting suggested that one of the most infamous crimes in Texas history was only moments away. Yet investigators would later learn that several observations made during those final minutes before closing would become central pieces of the case. One witness reported that a man entered the yogurt shop and asked permission to use the restroom, located toward the rear of the building. On its own, the request appeared entirely ordinary. Restaurants and retail businesses routinely allowed customers to use their facilities, and there would have been little reason for the employees to deny such a request. However, according to witness accounts, the man remained inside the restroom for an unusually long period. At the time, nobody considered that behavior alarming enough to intervene. Only after the murders would investigators revisit the detail repeatedly. Over the years, one theory emerged suggesting that the individual may have used the opportunity to open or block the rear entrance, making it easier for another person to enter the building after closing. This possibility attracted considerable attention because it could explain how the offenders gained access to the employees once the business was officially closed. Nevertheless, investigators were never able to establish that this theory was correct. No evidence conclusively proved that the restroom visitor tampered with the back door, and the identity of the man was never definitively connected to the crime. As a result, the theory remains exactly that, a possibility rather than an established fact. Another witness would later describe an equally puzzling observation. Sometime around 10:45 to 10:50 p.m., shortly before the store was scheduled to close, a couple who visited the yogurt shop noticed two young men sitting inside. According to their recollection, the pair appeared unusual because they did not seem to be actively eating or behaving like ordinary customers. Their presence lingered in the witnesses' memories precisely because they appeared out of place. At first, these observations seemed insignificant. Businesses often have customers who remain seated while talking or waiting for friends. Yet after the murders, investigators recognized that these two unidentified men might have been among the last people to see the victims alive. Despite years of investigation, however, authorities never determined who the two men were or whether they had any involvement whatsoever in the crime. They remain one of the enduring mysteries surrounding the case. By approximately 11 o'clock, the yogurt shop officially closed. The doors were locked, and any remaining customers had left. Only 4 people remained inside the building: Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy. Everything that happened after that point had no surviving witnesses, because none of the victims lived to describe the events. Investigators were forced to reconstruct the crime using physical evidence discovered later at the scene. According to the evidence collected during the investigation, the offender, or possibly offenders, acted shortly after the business closed. At least one individual armed with a firearm gained control of the 4 girls. Investigators have long believed that all 4 victims were taken hostage rather than attacked. Immediately, the fact that 4 individuals were restrained has led many investigators to question whether a single offender could realistically have controlled all of them at once. This observation contributed to early theories suggesting multiple perpetrators participated in the crime. At the same time, later forensic analysis identified DNA from one male contributor, while never conclusively establishing the presence of an additional offender. As a result, the question of whether one or more people carried out the attack has never been answered with certainty. Once the victims were under the offender's control, they were moved toward the rear portion of the yogurt shop. Physical evidence indicated that all 4 girls were restrained. Their hands and feet were bound using articles of clothing, including their own undergarments, and they were gagged to prevent them from calling for help. Investigators also determined that the victims had been forced to remove part of their clothing. These findings established that the attack involved far more than robbery alone. The evidence further suggested that the victims remained alive for a period of time after being restrained. There was no indication that the shootings occurred immediately after the offenders gained control of the store. Instead, the available evidence pointed toward a prolonged ordeal during which the girls remained captive in the back area of the building. Because the offenders left no surviving witnesses and later attempted to destroy the scene, investigators have never been able to determine the exact sequence of every event during those final moments. Nevertheless, forensic examination confirmed one particularly devastating conclusion. At least 3 of the 4 victims had been sexually assaulted before they were killed. This finding significantly shaped investigators' understanding of the crime and influence theories regarding the offenders' motivations. Unfortunately, the subsequent fire destroyed much of the biological evidence that might have provided greater clarity. As a result, investigators were unable to reconstruct every detail of what occurred or determine the precise order in which the assaults and shootings took place. Even so, some biological evidence survived despite the extensive fire damage. The remaining DNA samples would become extraordinarily important decades later, long after the original investigation had stalled. At the time, however, forensic technology had not yet advanced enough to fully exploit those samples. While the victims remained captive, the offenders also accessed the business safe. Approximately $540 in cash was taken from the store. The theft introduced another question that investigators would debate for years. Was robbery the primary motive? Or was the stolen money merely incidental to a crime driven by sexual violence? The relatively small amount taken from the safe caused many investigators to question whether financial gain alone could explain the brutality that followed. Others considered the possibility that the robbery served as a secondary objective or an attempt to disguise the true purpose of the attack. Despite decades of investigation, no definitive answer has ever resolved that question. The evidence supports only that money was stolen. It does not establish why the offenders committed the murders. As the terrifying ordeal inside the yogurt shop continued, the violence escalated toward its final stage. 2 different firearms would eventually be identified through ballistic examination: a .22 caliber handgun and a .380 AMT backup pistol. The use of 2 weapons further complicated investigators' efforts to determine whether more than one offender had been present. Although a single individual could theoretically have used both firearms, the evidence also remained consistent with the possibility that 2 armed offenders participated. Without surviving witnesses or definitive forensic proof establishing the exact number of perpetrators, investigators were left with competing possibilities rather than conclusive answers. What is certain is that, before the night was over, each of the 4 girls would suffer fatal gunshot wounds. Their final moments would unfold beyond the view of anyone outside the locked yogurt shop, leaving only physical evidence behind to tell investigators what had happened. The horrifying discoveries awaiting police and firefighters only a short time later would reveal the devastating outcome. But not every detail of how those final minutes unfolded. Those unanswered questions would become the foundation of a mystery that would endure for more than 3 decades. What investigators could establish with confidence was that the final stage of the crime unfolded with deliberate violence. After the victims had been restrained and at least 3 had been sexually assaulted, the offender or offenders began carrying out the killings. The physical evidence recovered from the scene indicated that 2 different firearms had been used during the attack: a .22 caliber handgun and a .380 AMT backup pistol. From the beginning of the investigation, this detail became one of the most significant pieces of forensic evidence because it immediately raised an important question. Did the presence of 2 weapons mean there were at least 2 killers inside the yogurt shop that night? Or had a single offender simply used both firearms? Investigators were never able to answer that question conclusively. While many detectives believed that controlling 4 victims at once would have been extremely difficult for one individual, later DNA evidence would identify only one confirmed male contributor. Even decades later, authorities acknowledged that the possibility of an accomplice could neither be confirmed nor ruled out. The uncertainty surrounding the number of offenders remains one of the enduring mysteries of the case. The medical examinations revealed that the victims had been shot at close range. Jennifer Harbison, 17 years old, was killed by a gunshot to the head. Her younger sister, Sarah Harbison, only 15 years old, was also shot at close range. Eliza Thomas, Jennifer's co-worker, suffered the same fate. The evidence indicated that these shootings were carried out in a manner investigators described as execution-style killings. There was no indication that the victims had been caught in a struggle or killed accidentally during a robbery gone wrong. Instead, the forensic findings suggested that the shootings were deliberate acts intended to ensure that no witnesses remained alive. The youngest victim, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, experienced an especially tragic sequence of events. Investigators determined that she had been shot twice. The first gunshot did not immediately prove fatal. A second shot ultimately caused the fatal injury, although the forensic evidence established this sequence. It could not reveal how much time separated the two shots or what Amy may have experienced during those final moments. Out of respect for the victims and the limitations of the available evidence, investigators have never claimed to know details that the physical evidence could not support. What remained beyond dispute was that 4 young lives ended inside the back area of the yogurt shop before the offenders left the building. Yet the crime did not end with the shootings. Instead, the perpetrators took additional steps that demonstrated a clear effort to destroy evidence and complicate any future investigation. After the killings, they gathered disposable foam cups and other combustible materials from inside the store and placed them over or around the victims' bodies. An accelerant was then used to ignite a fire. Within moments, flames began spreading through portions of the yogurt shop. Investigators concluded that the fire was intentionally set rather than accidental. They also believe its purpose was unmistakable: to destroy forensic evidence. Fire has long been recognized as one of the most destructive forces investigators can encounter. Heat damages biological material, obscures fingerprints, alters bloodstain patterns, and can destroy countless details that would otherwise help reconstruct a crime. Whoever started the fire appeared to understand that burning the scene could significantly reduce the chances of being identified. Later investigators pointed to 3 likely objectives behind the arson. First, destroying DNA and other biological evidence. Second, eliminating fingerprints and trace evidence that might remain throughout the building. Third, altering the overall crime scene so severely that reconstructing the sequence of events would become far more difficult. For years, those objectives appeared to have succeeded. The fire inflicted extensive damage throughout the yogurt shop, consuming evidence that investigators might otherwise have relied upon. Yet despite the severity of the blaze, complete destruction never occurred. Some biological materials survived. Certain ballistic evidence also remained intact. Although forensic scientists in 1991 lacked the technology necessary to fully analyze the surviving DNA, investigators carefully preserved what they could recover. Those decisions, made during the earliest stages of the investigation, would eventually prove crucial decades later when advances in forensic science transformed previously unusable evidence into the key that finally identified a suspect. Shortly after the offenders left the building, the fire continued to spread. From outside, however, there was initially little to distinguish the yogurt shop from the many other closed businesses nearby. The shopping center had grown quiet after closing time, with relatively few people remaining in the area. That silence would not last long. At approximately 11:20 to 11:30 p.m., a patrol officer driving through the area noticed smoke rising from the yogurt shop. Recognizing that something was seriously wrong, the officer immediately requested assistance from the fire department. Firefighters arrived quickly and began working to contain the blaze before it could spread to neighboring businesses. At that point, emergency responders were dealing with what appeared to be a commercial structure fire. There was no immediate indication that a mass murder had occurred inside. Only after the flames were brought under control did the horrifying reality begin to emerge. Entering this smoke-filled building, firefighters discovered the victims inside the rear section of a shop. 3 bodies were located close together near the back of the building, while a 4th was found lying separately several feet away. The arrangement of the bodies became one of many details investigators would later analyze in an effort to reconstruct the sequence of events. However, the extensive fire damage limited the conclusions that could safely be drawn. Officers arriving at the scene immediately recognized that this was no ordinary homicide. Investigation. Experienced investigators later described the yogurt shop as one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had encountered during their careers. The combination of multiple victims, evidence of sexual assault, execution-style shootings, robbery, and deliberate arson created an extraordinarily complex investigation from the very beginning. As police secure the area, crime scene technicians began the painstaking process of documenting everything that had survived the fire. Every recovered shell casing, every damaged object, every footprint, and every remaining biological sample became critically important because investigators understood that much of the original evidence had already been destroyed forever. Despite those challenges, several significant categories of evidence were successfully recovered. Investigators collected shell casings associated with the 2 firearms used during the murders. They documented shoe impressions found within the building. They examined burn patterns to better understand how the fire had been started and how it spread through the store. Most importantly, they recovered limited biological material containing male DNA. At the time, this evidence represented tremendous potential, but also enormous frustration. DNA analysis in the early 1990s was still developing, and investigators lacked many of the sophisticated techniques that would become available decades later. Although the preserved samples were recognized as valuable, they could not immediately provide the identity of the person who had left them behind. The realization that critical evidence existed but could not yet answer the central question of the investigation became one of the defining characteristics of the case. Detectives now faced an investigation unlike any Austin had experienced before. 4 teenage girls had been murdered inside a neighborhood business. The offenders had attempted to erase their tracks through fire. Witnesses had seen suspicious individuals before closing, yet none could identify the killers with certainty. Physical evidence pointed in multiple directions while leaving fundamental questions unresolved. Even during those first days, investigators understood that solving the yogurt shop murders would require enormous resources, careful forensic work, and patience. What they could not have known was that the search for answers would continue not for months or years, but for more than 3 decades, becoming one of the longest and most closely watched criminal investigations in modern Texas history. By the morning following the murders, the yogurt shop had transformed from a neighborhood business into the center of one of the largest criminal investigations Austin had ever undertaken. News of the crime spread rapidly throughout the city, leaving residents struggling to comprehend how 4 teenage girls could have been murdered inside a familiar storefront located in a busy commercial district. The brutality of the crime, combined with the victims' young ages, generated widespread fear and intense public attention. For investigators, however, the immediate priority was not public reaction, but preserving every remaining piece of evidence before time erased additional clues. The crime scene presented extraordinary challenges. Although firefighters had successfully extinguished the blaze before the building was completely destroyed, the fire had inflicted severe damage throughout the store. Heat, smoke, and water had altered or destroyed portions of the scene, forcing crime scene technicians to work with exceptional care. Every object recovered had to be documented, photographed, and analyzed to determine whether it represented meaningful evidence or simply debris left behind by the fire. Despite these obstacles, investigators recovered several important categories of evidence. They collected shell casings connected to the 2 firearms believed to have been used during the murders: a .22 caliber handgun and a .380 AMT backup pistol. Ballistics experts examined these casings carefully in hopes that they might eventually be matched to specific weapons. Shoe impressions found within the building were documented and preserved, offering another possible avenue for identifying whoever had entered the store that night. Investigators also analyzed burn patterns throughout the building to understand how the fire had been started. Their examination supported the conclusion that the blaze had been intentionally set after the murders rather than resulting from an accident. Most significant of all was the recovery of biological evidence containing male DNA. Although much of the forensic material had been damaged by the fire, Enough survived to preserve a genetic profile that investigators believed belonged to someone directly connected to the crime. In 1991, however, DNA technology remained relatively limited compared with what would become available in later decades. Detectives understood they possessed potentially valuable evidence, but they also recognized that the available scientific methods could not yet provide the answers they desperately needed. As forensic teams processed the crime scene, investigators expanded the inquiry beyond the walls of the yogurt shop. More than 150 police officers and investigators became involved in the case during its early stages. The scale of the investigation reflected both the seriousness of the crime and the pressure to identify those responsible as quickly as possible. Officers began interviewing anyone who might have visited the shopping center that evening, worked nearby, or lived in surrounding neighborhoods. Thousands of interviews were eventually conducted as detectives attempted to reconstruct every movement that occurred around the yogurt shop before and after closing time. Every customer who had visited the business on December 6th became a potential source of information. Employees from neighboring stores were questioned about unusual vehicles, unfamiliar individuals, or suspicious behavior. Residents living near the shopping center were asked whether they had heard gunshots, observed smoke, or noticed anything unusual during the late evening hours. Detectives carefully assembled timelines based on witness accounts, comparing statements in an effort to identify consistencies or contradictions that might reveal the offender's movements. Among the most closely examined witness statements were those describing the unidentified man who had reportedly spent an unusually long time inside the restroom shortly before closing. Investigators explored the possibility that he had somehow prepared the building for the attack by opening or blocking the rear entrance. At the same time, detectives attempted to identify the two young men reportedly seen sitting inside the yogurt shop around 10:45 to 10:50 p.m. These observations appeared potentially significant because they involved individuals who may have been among the last people to see the victims alive. Yet despite repeated efforts, investigators were unable to conclusively identify those individuals or establish whether either observation had any direct connection to the murders. As days turned into weeks, detectives pursued every lead available to them. Unfortunately, the investigation soon encountered another problem common in high-profile criminal cases: false information. The enormous publicity surrounding the murders attracted individuals who claimed to possess inside knowledge or even responsibility for the crime. Over the years, more than 50 people confessed to committing the murders or claimed to know who had carried them out. Each confession required investigators to devote valuable time and resources toward verification. Detectives compared every statement against the known physical evidence, crime scene details, and witness accounts. One by one, these confessions collapsed under scrutiny. Some individuals could not accurately describe crime scene. Others provided timelines inconsistent with established facts. In several cases, investigators determined that the confessions had been entirely fabricated. While every false confession consumed investigative resources, authorities had little choice but to examine each one thoroughly because the possibility always existed that one might contain information known only to the true offender. As months passed without an arrest, frustration steadily increased. Families of the victims continued searching for answers while investigators faced mounting public pressure to solve the case. Yet despite thousands of interviews, extensive forensic examinations, and countless investigative hours, no suspect could be linked conclusively to the evidence recovered from the yogurt shop. The preserved DNA profile remained unidentified. Witness descriptions failed to produce definitive suspects, and no physical evidence clearly established who had committed the murders. Years gradually passed without resolution. advances in forensic science during the 1990s encouraged investigators to revisit portions of the evidence. But the available DNA technology still could not identify the unknown male whose genetic material had been recovered from the scene. Although investigators remained committed to solving the case, the yogurt shop murders increasingly became known as one of Texas's most difficult cold cases. Then, toward the end of the decade, the investigation appeared to experience a dramatic breakthrough. In 1999, detectives shifted their attention toward four young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce. Investigators believed these individuals might have been involved in the murders, and lengthy interrogations followed. During those interviews, some of the suspects made statements that investigators interpreted as confessions for a case that had remained unsolved for years. These admissions appeared to offer long-awaited progress. Families, investigators, and the public hoped that the mystery might finally be approaching its conclusion. Yet even as charges were pursued, serious concerns began emerging about the reliability of those confessions. Rather than supporting one another, portions of the statements contradicted each other. More troubling still, aspects of the confessions failed to align with the physical evidence collected from the crime scene years earlier. Investigators and prosecutors now faced an increasingly difficult question. Had they finally identified the people responsible for one of Austin's most notorious crimes? Or were they relying upon statements that did not accurately reflect what had happened inside the yogurt shop? At that stage, the preserved DNA evidence remained unable to provide a definitive answer. The technology required to fully evaluate its significance had not yet arrived. As the legal process moved forward, the investigation entered its most controversial chapter. What had initially appeared to be the resolution of a long unsolved case would eventually become the subject of intense scrutiny, raising profound questions about confessions, forensic evidence, and the standards required to secure justice in one of the most devastating criminal cases in Texas history. The investigation entered a new and highly controversial phase when detectives focused their attention on four young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce. By the late 1990s, nearly a decade had passed since the murders inside the yogurt shop. The original crime scene had long since been processed, thousands of interviews had been completed, and countless investigative leads had been exhausted without identifying the person responsible. Public pressure had never completely disappeared. For the families of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, every passing year represented another year without certainty. Another year in which the questions surrounding the deaths of their daughters remained unanswered. Investigators continued searching for any avenue that might finally provide the breakthrough the case desperately needed. Against that backdrop, attention gradually shifted toward Springsteen, Scott, Wellborn, and Pierce. Detectives believed these men might possess information about the crime, and extensive interrogations followed. During those questioning sessions, some of the men made statements that investigators interpreted as confessions to involvement in the murders. For law enforcement, the apparent admissions seemed to represent the first major development in years. After nearly a decade of uncertainty, investigators believed they might finally have identified the people responsible for one of Austin's most infamous crimes. Yet from the beginning, significant problems surrounded those confessions. As investigators compared the statements against one another, inconsistencies became increasingly apparent. Details offered by one suspect often failed to match those provided by another. Instead of presenting a single coherent account of the events inside the yogurt shop, the various confessions differed in important ways. Even more troubling, portions of the statements failed to correspond with the physical evidence collected from the crime scene. This conflict between confession evidence and forensic evidence would eventually become the defining issue of the entire prosecution. In criminal investigations, confessions are often viewed as powerful evidence because they appear to come directly from the individual accused of committing the offense. However, experienced investigators and courts also recognize that confessions must be evaluated alongside objective evidence rather than accepted automatically as proof of guilt. In the yogurt shop case, the forensic evidence collected in 1991 remained the most objective record of what had occurred inside the building. When elements of the confessions failed to align with that evidence, serious questions naturally arose regarding their reliability. Despite those concerns, prosecutors proceeded with criminal charges. The legal process that followed initially appeared to move the investigation closer to resolution. 2 of the accused men were ultimately convicted. One of those convictions resulted in a death sentence, reflecting the extraordinary seriousness of the crime and the prosecution's belief that justice had finally been achieved. Meanwhile, the other 2 suspects were never convicted, although their names remained publicly associated with the murders for years. To many observers at the time, it appeared that the long-running mystery had finally been solved. Yet beneath the surface, unresolved problems continued to cast doubt over the outcome. As advances in forensic science accelerated during the early years of the 21st century, the preserved DNA evidence from the yogurt shop attracted renewed attention. Unlike witness memories or confession statements, DNA evidence did not depend upon recollection, interpretation, or interrogation. If sufficient biological material remained available for testing using improved scientific methods, it could potentially answer questions that investigators had struggled with since 1991. As additional examinations were performed, the DNA evidence increasingly failed to support the prosecution's theory. Instead of strengthening the convictions, the scientific findings undermined confidence in them. The growing conflict between the forensic evidence and the earlier confessions became impossible to ignore. Legal challenges followed as defense attorneys argued that the convictions could not stand in light of the inconsistencies between the statements and the objective physical evidence. Courts were forced to reconsider whether the confessions, obtained after lengthy interrogations, accurately reflected the events of December 6, 1991. Although the available information does not establish exactly why the suspects made the statements attributed to them, later reviews identified indications that the confessions may have been the product of coercive interrogation practices or otherwise lacked reliability. The existence of contradictions among the confessions themselves further complicated the prosecution's position. If multiple individuals confessed to participating in the same crime, yet described materially different events, determining which, if any, account reflected reality became extraordinarily difficult. Over time, the legal foundation supporting the convictions continued to weaken. As forensic testing improved and additional review occurred, the earlier judgments could no longer be sustained with confidence. The convictions were ultimately overturned, including the death sentence that had once appeared to bring finality to the case. The remaining prosecutions also collapsed, leaving investigators once again without anyone legally responsible for the murders. For the families of the victims, the reversal produced another painful chapter in an already devastating story. The hope that the case had finally reached a conclusion disappeared, replaced once again by uncertainty. At the same time, the 4 accused men found themselves living under the shadow of one of the most notorious murder cases in Texas history, despite the collapse of the prosecutions against them. The yogurt shop investigation had now become more than an unsolved homicide. It had also become an example of how complex criminal investigations can produce deeply controversial outcomes when confession evidence and forensic evidence point in different directions. The case increasingly attracted attention not only because of the brutality of the original crime, but also because it illustrated the importance of objective scientific evidence in evaluating criminal responsibility. Detectives, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and legal scholars all recognized that the investigation had entered unfamiliar territory. The original evidence collected in 1991 still existed, but technology available at the time had been incapable of fully exploiting it. Decades later, however, science was beginning to offer possibilities that had once seemed impossible. Investigators refused to abandon the preserved biological samples recovered from the fire-damaged crime scene, although the evidence had survived only partially. Advances in DNA analysis suggested that answers might still be hidden within material that earlier laboratories could not fully interpret. As years continued to pass, new forensic techniques emerged, including investigative genetic genealogy, a method capable of identifying unknown individuals through genetic relationships rather than direct matches alone. Across the United States, this technology had already demonstrated remarkable success in solving cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. For investigators working the yogurt shop murders, the possibility that the preserved DNA might finally identify the unknown male contributor represented the most promising lead the case had seen since the night of the murders themselves. Unlike earlier theories built upon witness observations or disputed confessions, genetic evidence offered the prospect of objective identification rooted in biology rather than memory. Detectives carefully revisited the evidence collected from the yogurt shop, recognizing that decisions made by crime scene technicians more than 30 years earlier had preserved the possibility of future scientific breakthroughs. What investigators could not yet know was that those preserved DNA samples would eventually lead them to a man whose name had never emerged during the original investigation, whose violent criminal history fit the nature of the attack, and whose death years earlier meant that, even after his identification, some of the most important questions surrounding the yogurt shop murders would remain forever beyond the reach of the criminal justice system. More than 3 decades after the murders at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, the investigation entered a phase that detectives working the original case could scarcely have imagined in 1991. Throughout those intervening years, forensic science had undergone a remarkable transformation. Techniques that were once considered experimental had become standard investigative tools, while entirely new methods had emerged that allowed investigators to extract meaningful information from biological evidence previously regarded as too limited or too degraded for analysis. For the yogurt shop murders, these scientific advances represented something more than technological progress. They offered the possibility of answering questions that had remained unresolved for more than 30 years. Although the fire intentionally set inside the yogurt shop had destroyed much of the physical evidence, investigators had carefully preserved the biological material that survived. At the time it was collected, detectives understood its potential importance even though contemporary laboratories lacked the ability to identify the individual who had left it behind. That decision to preserve every recoverable sample ultimately became one of the most significant moments in the entire investigation. Evidence that seemed incapable of solving the case in 1991 would later become the key to reopening it. By the mid-2020s, investigators returned once again to the preserved DNA using methods unavailable during the original investigation. Among those methods was investigative genetic genealogy, an approach that had already demonstrated its ability to generate leads in long unsolved criminal cases, rather than relying solely on direct comparisons with known suspects. This technique allowed investigators to examine genetic relationships and identify individuals through family connections and advanced DNA analysis. For cases in which traditional investigative methods had failed, the technology represented a powerful new avenue of inquiry. The yogurt shop evidence was submitted for renewed examination with the hope that modern science might finally succeed where earlier efforts had reached their limits. The results marked the most significant breakthrough in the history of the investigation. The male DNA recovered from the crime scene was identified as belonging to Robert Eugene Brashers. For investigators who had spent decades pursuing countless leads, interviewing thousands of witnesses, and evaluating more than 50 false confessions, this identification fundamentally changed the direction of the case. Unlike previous theories that relied upon uncertain witness observations or disputed confessions, the DNA evidence directly connected Brashers to biological material recovered from the crime scene itself. Investigators no longer faced an unidentified genetic profile. They now had a name. The available information further established that Robert Eugene Brashers was not an unknown individual with no history of violent crime. According to the investigative findings summarized after the renewed DNA analysis, Brashers was a rapist and murderer. His documented history of violent criminal behavior made the DNA identification especially significant because it aligned with the known characteristics of a yogurt shop attack, which had involved sexual assaults in addition to robbery, murder, and arson. The discovery did not simply identify a previously overlooked suspect. It identified an individual whose known criminal conduct was consistent with the nature of the offense investigators had been attempting to solve since 1991. Detectives did not rely solely upon the DNA evidence. They also revisited the ballistic evidence preserved from the original investigation. Shell casings recovered from the yogurt shop had long been associated with 2 firearms, including a .380 AMT backup pistol. During the renewed investigation, authorities compared this evidence with the firearm associated with Brashers at the time of his death. According to the available findings, the ballistic evidence proved consistent with the weapon Brashers possessed during the confrontation that ended his life in 1999. The convergence of DNA evidence and ballistic analysis significantly strengthened investigators' conclusion that Brashers had been responsible for the yogurt shop murders. The importance of independent forensic evidence supporting the same conclusion cannot be overstated. DNA established a direct biological connection, while ballistic examination reinforced the investigative findings through physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. Together, these developments represented the strongest evidentiary foundation the case had ever possessed. Yet even this remarkable breakthrough did not answer every question. One of the central mysteries that had surrounded the investigation from its earliest days remained unresolved. Had Brashers acted alone? Throughout the original investigation, detectives repeatedly questioned whether one offender could realistically have controlled 4 victims simultaneously. Witnesses had reported seeing 2 young men inside the yogurt shop shortly before closing, and the use of 2 different firearms had further encouraged speculation that more than one offender participated in the attack. Although the renewed DNA analysis identified Brashers as the source of biological evidence recovered at the scene, it did not conclusively establish whether another individual had also been present. Investigators acknowledged this limitation openly. The available evidence confirmed Brashers' involvement but did not eliminate the possibility that an accomplice may have assisted him, because additional definitive evidence was unavailable. Authorities could neither prove nor disprove the existence of a second offender. The question therefore remains one of the enduring uncertainties surrounding the case. The identities of the 2 men observed by witnesses before closing also remained unresolved. During the original investigation, detectives devoted considerable effort to identifying those individuals, believing they might represent either witnesses or participants in the crime. Despite renewed interest following the DNA breakthrough, no conclusive determination established whether those men had any relationship to Brashers or the murders. Their presence continues to occupy an uncertain place within the investigative timeline, illustrating how some pieces of evidence resist definitive interpretation even after decades of analysis. Investigators also continue to debate the precise motive behind the crime. The physical evidence clearly established that approximately $540 had been stolen from the yogurt shop. It also confirmed that at least 3 victims had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. These facts raise an enduring question that modern forensic science alone could not answer. Was robbery the primary objective, with sexual violence occurring during the offense? Or was sexual assault the principal motive, with the theft serving as an additional crime or an attempt to misdirect investigators? The available evidence supports each element of the offense, but does not reveal the offender's intentions. Consequently, investigators have never claimed certainty regarding the dominant motive. Another unresolved issue concerns whether Brasher's may have been connected to additional unsolved crimes. Once investigators identified him through DNA, attention naturally turned toward examining his potential involvement in other offenses. However, based solely on the available information, no definitive conclusions have been established regarding any additional cases. As with the question of accomplices, investigators have recognized the possibility without presenting unsupported conclusions. One final circumstance profoundly shaped the investigation's outcome. Robert Eugene Brasher's had died in 1999 during a confrontation with police. As a result, by the time modern forensic science identified him through DNA in 2025, he had already been dead for more than 2 decades. His death meant that investigators could never question him regarding the events inside the yogurt shop, his motives, or the possible involvement of anyone else. No interview, confession, or courtroom testimony would ever provide additional clarity. The evidence preserved at the scene had ultimately revealed his identity, but it could not compel answers from a man who was no longer alive. In many criminal investigations, identifying a suspect marks the beginning of prosecution and trial. In the yogurt shop case, however, the identification arrived too late for any criminal proceedings. Instead, the breakthrough served a different purpose. It corrected the investigative record, redirected responsibility toward the individual identified by modern forensic science, and laid the foundation for addressing one of the most troubling consequences of the earlier investigation: the wrongful accusations against 4 men whose lives had been permanently altered by a case that, despite finally identifying suspect, still refused to surrender every one of its secrets. The identification of Robert Eugene Brasher's through modern DNA analysis marked a turning point. Unlike any other in the history of the yogurt shop murders investigation, for more than 30 years, detectives had searched for answers while the case moved through dramatically different phases. It began with an exhaustive homicide investigation, evolved into one of the most closely watched cold cases in Texas, passed through a period of controversial prosecutions and overturned convictions, and ultimately arrived at a conclusion shaped not by witness testimony or disputed confessions, but by advances in forensic science. Although the identification of Brasher's could never restore the lives that had been lost or answer every remaining question, it fundamentally altered the legal and historical understanding of the case. One of the most immediate consequences involved the 4 men who had spent years living under suspicion: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce had become central figures during the late stages of the original investigation. Some had provided confessions after lengthy interrogations, statements that later came under increasing scrutiny because they conflicted with one another and with significant portions of the physical evidence. 2 men had been convicted, including one who received a death sentence before that conviction was eventually overturned. The remaining 2 were never convicted. Yet they continued to carry the public stigma of being associated with one of the most notorious murder cases in Texas history. As DNA technology advanced and the biological evidence from the yogurt shop was analyzed using investigative genetic genealogy, the foundation supporting those earlier accusations steadily collapsed. Once Robert Eugene Brashers was identified as the source of the DNA recovered from the crime scene, the earlier prosecutions could no longer be reconciled with the objective forensic evidence. The scientific findings pointed investigators toward an entirely different individual, forcing authorities to confront the reality that the case had followed the wrong path for many years. In 2026, the 4 previously accused men were officially declared innocent. This formal exoneration represented far more than a procedural legal correction. It acknowledged that the criminal justice system had failed to distinguish adequately between disputed confession evidence and objective forensic evidence. The Declaration of Innocence also recognized the profound consequences that wrongful accusations can impose upon individuals long after criminal proceedings have ended. Although the official record had finally been corrected, years spent under suspicion could not simply be erased. The case became a powerful reminder that investigations involving crimes of extraordinary public pressure require careful adherence to reliable evidence, particularly when physical evidence and confession statements appear inconsistent. Following the official exonerations, the city of Austin agreed to resolve claims arising from the wrongful prosecutions through a settlement totaling approximately $35 million. While financial compensation cannot undo years of legal uncertainty or restore lost opportunities, the settlement represented institutional recognition that the wrongly accused had suffered significant harm. The legal resolution became another defining chapter in the history of the yogurt shop murders, demonstrating that the pursuit of justice extends beyond identifying offenders. It also requires correcting mistakes when new evidence proves earlier conclusions were incorrect. Yet even after the identification of Brashers and the exoneration of the 4 accused men, investigators openly acknowledged that important mysteries remained unresolved. The first and perhaps most significant question concerns whether Brashers acted alone. Throughout the investigation, several pieces of evidence encouraged speculation that multiple offenders may have participated in the crime. For victims had been controlled simultaneously inside the yogurt shop. 2 different firearms, a .22 caliber handgun and a .380 AMT backup pistol, had been used during the murders. Witnesses had also reported seeing 2 young men inside the store shortly before closing. These facts naturally led many investigators to consider the possibility that more than one offender had been present. At the same time, the modern DNA evidence definitively identified Brashers as the source of biological material recovered from the scene. However, it did not establish whether another participant had also been involved, because additional conclusive evidence has never emerged. Investigators have refrained from declaring that Brashers acted entirely alone or that he unquestionably had an accomplice. Instead, the question remains officially unresolved, illustrating the limits of even the most sophisticated forensic science when critical evidence has been destroyed or lost. Another enduring mystery concerns the 2 unidentified men reportedly observed inside the yogurt shop shortly before closing. Witnesses considered their behavior unusual, and detectives spent years attempting to identify them. Despite those efforts, investigators never established whether these individuals were innocent customers, potential witnesses, or participants in the crime. Their identities remain unknown, and their significance, if any, has never been conclusively determined. The man who reportedly asked to use the restroom and remained there for an unusually long period also continues to occupy an uncertain place within the investigation. The theory that he may have opened or blocked the rear door to facilitate the attack has never been proven. Consequently, this detail remains an unresolved possibility rather than an established fact. Questions regarding motive also persist. The evidence clearly demonstrates that approximately $540 was stolen from the yogurt shop. It also confirms that at least 3 of the victims were sexually assaulted before being murdered. These facts establish that both robbery and sexual violence occurred during the commission of the crime. What they do not establish is which objective motivated the offender or offenders most strongly. Investigators have therefore avoided claiming certainty regarding whether financial gain, sexual assault, or a combination of both served as the principal motive. The destruction caused by the intentionally set fire prevented the recovery of evidence that might have clarified the sequence of events or the offender's intentions. Another unresolved issue concerns whether Robert Eugene Brashers may have been connected to other unsolved crimes. Following his identification through DNA, investigators naturally examined that possibility. However, based on the available information, no definitive conclusions have been announced linking him to additional unresolved cases. As with many aspects of the yogurt shop murders, the absence of conclusive evidence requires caution rather than speculation. The inability to question Brashers after his identification further limited the investigation. Having died during a confrontation with police in 1999, he could never be interviewed regarding the events of December 6, 1991. He could provide no explanation for his actions, identify any potential accomplices, or answer the questions that had haunted investigators for decades. His death ensured that portions of the case would likely remain permanently beyond the reach of the criminal justice system. Even so, the overall legacy of the yogurt shop murders extends far beyond the identification of a suspect. The case demonstrates the extraordinary importance of preserving physical evidence. Even when contemporary technology appears incapable of solving a crime, the biological material recovered from the fire-damaged yogurt shop survived because investigators in 1991 recognized its potential value, despite having no practical means of fully analyzing it at the time. More than 30 years later, those preserved samples became the decisive factor that transformed the investigation. Equally significant is the lesson concerning the relationship between forensic science and the broader pursuit of justice. Throughout the investigation, witness observations, interrogation statements, and competing theories all influenced the direction of the case. It was ultimately objective, scientific evidence that redirected investigators toward the individual identified through DNA. The case illustrates why physical evidence must remain at the center of serious criminal investigations, particularly when other forms of evidence contain inconsistencies or uncertainties. Above all, however, the yogurt shop murders remain the story of 4 young lives interrupted without warning. Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers entered the yogurt shop on what appeared to be an ordinary Friday evening. Jennifer and Eliza were finishing a routine work shift. Sarah had come to meet her older sister before continuing with plans for the night. Amy had accompanied her close friend while they waited together. None of them had any known connection to violent crime. None could have anticipated that the routine events of an ordinary evening would become part of one of the longest and most closely examined homicide investigations in American history. More than 3 decades later, the scientific advances that identified Robert Eugene Brashers provided long-awaited answers to some of the case's central questions while leaving others unresolved. Justice in this investigation arrived slowly and imperfectly. It corrected wrongful accusations, identified the individual connected through modern forensic evidence, and reaffirmed the value of scientific progress. Yet it could never completely erase the pain endured by the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. nor could it fully illuminate every moment of what happened inside the yogurt shop on the night of December 6, 1991. For that reason, the yogurt shop murders continue to be remembered not only as one of Texas's most devastating crimes, but also as a lasting reminder that truth sometimes emerges only after decades of persistence. And even then, some questions may remain unanswered forever. The conclusion of a yogurt shop murders investigation after more than 3 decades did not arrive in the form many people expected. There was no courtroom confrontation, no trial where a jury would hear testimony from the accused, and no final confession explaining every unanswered question. Instead, the case reached its closest point to resolution through the silent language of forensic evidence. A preserved DNA sample, collected from a devastated crime scene in 1991, traveled through decades of scientific advancement until it finally revealed the identity of the man connected to the tragedy. Yet even with that discovery, the story of the yogurt shop murders remained complicated. It became not only a story about a violent crime, but also a story about the fragile balance between the search for justice and the danger of reaching conclusions before the evidence is complete. For the families of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, the identification of Robert Eugene Brasher's provided an answer that had been missing for most of their lives. For more than 30 years, they had carried the weight of uncertainty. They knew how their loved ones had died, but they did not know who had caused that suffering. They watched as the investigation moved through different stages, from early optimism to years of frustration, from apparent breakthroughs to the collapse of those developments. Every new lead brought the possibility of closure, but every failed theory brought the pain of disappointment once again. The DNA breakthrough changed the direction of that emotional journey. Although it could not undo the loss they had experienced, it provided a level of certainty that had been absent for decades. The evidence identified a person connected to the crime and allowed investigators to separate fact from the uncertainty that had surrounded the case for so long. At the same time, the resolution also forced a painful examination of the years when 4 other men had been accused. The cases involving Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce became one of the most controversial parts of a yogurt shop investigation. The original crime created enormous pressure to find answers. For teenagers had been murdered in a shocking act of violence, and the community wanted those responsible to be held accountable. Investigators faced the difficult task of solving a crime where the offenders had attempted to destroy evidence and leave behind confusion. Under those circumstances, the discovery of suspects and confessions appeared to offer the possibility of finally bringing the case to an end. However, the later examination of the evidence revealed that apparent certainty can sometimes be misleading. The confessions that once seemed central to the prosecution were eventually questioned because they contained contradictions and failed to align with important physical evidence. The emergence of DNA evidence pointing toward Brasher's fundamentally changed the understanding of the investigation. It demonstrated the importance of examining every piece of evidence through the lens of objective verification rather than relying solely on statements or assumptions. The exoneration of the 4 men became a necessary part of the case's final chapter. Justice for the victims required not only identifying the person responsible, but also acknowledging when previous conclusions were wrong. The Declaration of Innocence in 2026 represented recognition that the pursuit of justice must include accountability for investigative failures, as well as accountability for criminal acts. The financial settlement reached with the city of Austin, totaling approximately $35 million, reflected the seriousness of the harm caused by the wrongful accusations. However, no settlement could fully restore the years affected by suspicion, legal battles, and public association with one of America's most infamous crimes. The yogurt shop case, therefore, became an example of how the consequences of a criminal investigation extend beyond the search for a suspect. The process itself can profoundly affect the lives of those involved, including people who are not responsible for the original crime. While the identification of Brasher's answered one of the most important questions in the investigation, it also highlighted the limitations of solving historical crimes. Because Brasher's died in 1999 during a confrontation with police, investigators could not question him after identifying him through DNA. They could not ask him what happened inside the yogurt shop. They could not determine whether another person helped him. They could not obtain explanations for decisions made during the crime or learn whether he had information about other unresolved cases. In many investigations, identifying the offender creates an opportunity for further discovery through interrogation and trial. Here, that opportunity no longer existed. The evidence could identify him, but it could not make him speak. This absence of answers left several important questions permanently unresolved. Perhaps the most significant is whether Brasher's acted alone. The possibility of multiple offenders had existed from the beginning of the investigation. For victims had been controlled inside the store. 2 firearms were used. Witnesses reported seeing 2 men inside the business shortly before closing. These details created reasonable questions about whether more than one individual participated. However, modern DNA evidence confirmed Brasher's connection to the crime without proving whether another person was involved. Investigators have therefore remained careful not to claim more than the evidence supports. The possibility of an accomplice remains open, but it has never been confirmed. The same caution applies to the unidentified individuals observed before the murders. The 2 men reportedly seen inside the yogurt shop became a memorable part of the investigation, because they may have been among the last people observed near the victims before the attack. Yet despite years of effort, their identities and possible connection to the crime were never established. They represent one of the many unanswered threads that continue to surround the case. The man who reportedly remained inside the restroom for an unusually long time before closing represents another example of uncertainty. Investigators consider the possibility that he may have played a role in allowing access to the building after hours. But no evidence ever confirmed that theory. In a case filled with incomplete information, distinguishing between possibilities and proven facts became one of the greatest challenges faced by investigators. The motive behind the crime also remains unclear. The theft of approximately $540 suggests that robbery occurred, but the amount taken does not fully explain the severity of the attack. The sexual assaults and murders indicate a level of violence beyond a simple property crime. Whether the robbery was the primary purpose or merely an additional act committed during a crime, motivated by other factors, remains unknown. The fire set afterward further limited investigators' ability to reconstruct the offender's intentions. What remains certain is the impact the case had on the city of Austin and on criminal investigations across the country. The yogurt shop murders demonstrated both the power and the limitations of forensic science. Evidence collected during a difficult and chaotic crime scene survived long enough to become useful. Decades later, the technology that existed in 1991 could not answer the questions investigators needed to solve the case. But future technology eventually transformed those same samples into the foundation of the breakthrough. It showed why preserving evidence matters, even when immediate solutions appear impossible. It also showed why patience is essential in long-term investigations. The case endured because investigators, families, and forensic specialists continued searching despite years without answers. The story of the yogurt shop murders ultimately returns to the 4 young women whose lives were taken: Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas. And Amy Ayers were not defined by the tragedy that ended their lives. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and teenagers with ordinary hopes and plans. Their final evening began with simple expectations: finishing work, meeting family, spending time with friends, and returning home. The horror of what happened inside the yogurt shop changed their families forever and left a lasting mark on Austin. More than 30 years later, the investigation finally reached a point of greater clarity. A suspect had been identified. Wrongful accusations had been addressed. Scientific evidence had provided answers that once seemed impossible to obtain. But the case also preserved an important truth about justice. Even when the identity of an offender is revealed, the consequences of a crime can continue for generations. The yogurt shop murders remain a reminder that behind every investigation are real people whose lives cannot be reduced to evidence files, court documents, or headlines. The pursuit of justice is ultimately about honoring those lives, preserving their memories, and continuing the search for truth even when the path is long, uncertain, and filled with unanswered questions. The yogurt shop murders remain one of the most haunting criminal cases in American history, not only because of the violence that occurred inside a small business in Austin, Texas, but because of the decades-long journey required to understand what happened. The case became a symbol of the difficulties involved in solving crimes where evidence has been damaged. Memories have faded, and early investigative conclusions must later be reconsidered. It was a case defined by tragedy, uncertainty, controversy, and finally, the ability of modern forensic science to reveal information that had remained hidden for more than 30 years. Yet at its center, beyond the investigations, court proceedings, and scientific discoveries, the story has always belonged to 4 young victims whose lives ended far too soon. Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers were remembered by their families and friends not because of the circumstances of their deaths, but because of who they were before that terrible night. Jennifer was 17 years old and working at a yogurt shop, a young woman responsible enough to hold a job and prepare for the next stage of her life. Sarah, only 15, was her younger sister who came to meet her after work. Eliza, also 17, was Jennifer's co-worker who shared the closing shift that evening. Amy, 13, was Sarah's close friend who accompanied her while they waited. They were teenagers living ordinary lives, surrounded by family, friendship, and plans for the future. The details of the crime remained disturbing precisely because there was nothing unusual about the beginning of the evening. They were not people connected to criminal activity or dangerous circumstances. They were simply in a place where they expected to be safe. A small yogurt shop at the end of a work shift should have been an ordinary setting. Instead, it became the scene of a crime that would challenge investigators for generations. The attack demonstrated a level of planning and brutality that immediately made clear that this was not a simple robbery. The victims were restrained, sexually assaulted, murdered, and the building was intentionally set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. The offenders attempted to erase what had happened inside the store, but they could not completely eliminate the truth. Among the destruction, investigators recovered fragments of evidence that would eventually become crucial: the shell casings, shoe impressions, and surviving biological material represented pieces of a puzzle that could not be solved immediately, but would remain available for future investigators. The early years of the investigation reflected the challenges of solving a crime in an era when forensic technology was far more limited than it is today. Detectives conducted thousands of interviews, followed countless leads, and examined numerous possible suspects. The discovery of false confessions added another layer of difficulty. More than 50 people eventually claimed involvement or offered information about the murders. Yet each claim failed when compared against known facts. Instead of helping solve the case, These false statements created additional obstacles by forcing investigators to separate reliable evidence from misinformation. The investigation became a reminder that solving a crime is not simply about finding someone who claims responsibility. It requires careful examination of whether that person's words match the physical reality of what occurred. The most controversial chapter of the case began when Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce became the focus of investigators' attention. The confessions obtained during that period appeared to provide answers that had eluded authorities for years. However, as the legal process continued, serious questions emerged. The statements contained contradictions, and parts of the accounts did not correspond with the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. Eventually, advances in forensic analysis weakened the case against them. The convictions were overturned, and years later the 4 men were officially declared innocent. Their experiences became an important part of the broader discussion surrounding wrongful convictions and the need for caution when evaluating confession evidence. The collapse of those prosecutions did not mean that the original crime became less important. Instead, it reinforced the necessity of continuing the search for the truth. The surviving DNA evidence from the yogurt shop remained one of the most important unanswered elements of the investigation. For years, it existed as a silent witness, containing information that investigators could not yet access. When investigative genetic genealogy and modern DNA techniques became available, that evidence finally revealed the identity of Robert Eugene Brasher's. The discovery represented the culmination of decades of scientific development and investigative persistence. Brasher's identification changed the historical understanding of the case. The evidence connected him to the crime scene through DNA, and ballistic analysis further supported the conclusion through comparisons involving the firearm evidence. The breakthrough provided investigators with the strongest evidence ever obtained in the case. However, it also demonstrated that some investigations can reach answers without achieving complete understanding. Even after Brasher's was identified, several questions remained unanswered. Investigators could not determine with certainty whether he acted alone or whether another person participated. The possibility of an accomplice remained because certain aspects of the crime, including the number of victims, the use of 2 firearms, and witness observations before closing, continued to raise questions. The identities of the 2 men seen inside the yogurt shop shortly before the murders were never confirmed. The significance of those observations remains uncertain. Similarly, the exact motive behind the crime remains unknown. The stolen money, the sexual assaults, the murders, and the intentional fire all formed part of the same event. But the evidence could not reveal precisely what motivated the offender or offenders. These unanswered questions are a reminder that even advanced forensic science has limits. Evidence can reveal who was connected to a crime, but it cannot always reveal every thought, decision, or action that occurred during those final moments. The yogurt shop murders also demonstrate the importance of preserving evidence for the future. When investigators collected the DNA samples in 1991, they could not have predicted that decades later those samples would become the key to solving the case. The technology required to interpret the evidence did not yet exist. However, because the evidence was preserved, future generations of investigators had the opportunity to continue the search. This principle has become increasingly important in modern criminal investigations. A case that appears impossible to solve today may become solvable tomorrow because science continues to evolve. Perhaps the greatest lesson from the yogurt shop murders is that justice is not always achieved quickly. Sometimes, the path toward truth requires patience measured not in months or years, but in decades. Families may wait a lifetime for answers. Investigators may retire before seeing a case resolved. Evidence may remain silent until technology catches up with the questions being asked. But the pursuit of truth continues because every victim deserves recognition and every family deserves the fullest understanding possible. More than 30 years after the murders, the identification of Robert Eugene Brasher's provided an answer that had long been denied. It corrected the record regarding those who were wrongly accused and demonstrated the power of scientific evidence. Yet the case will always remain connected first and foremost to Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers. Their lives were far more important than the crime that ended them. They were young people with families who loved them, friends who remembered them, and futures that were never allowed to unfold. The lasting responsibility of remembering this case is not only to discuss the investigation, the evidence, or the unanswered questions, is also to remember the 4 individuals whose names should stand above the tragedy itself. The yogurt shop murders remain a painful chapter in American criminal history, but they also represent perseverance, the determination of families, investigators, and forensic specialists who continued searching for answers long after many believed those answers might never come. The case shows that time can complicate justice, but it does not always prevent it. Decades may pass, evidence may be damaged, and memories may fade. But the pursuit of truth can continue. And sometimes, after years of silence, the smallest remaining piece of evidence can finally tell a story that the world has been waiting to hear. The yogurt shop murders closed one chapter of uncertainty while leaving behind a lasting reminder of how complicated the search for justice can become. For more than 30 years, the case remained suspended between tragedy and unanswered questions. Investigators knew what had happened inside the yogurt shop on the night of December 6, 1991. They knew 4 young girls had been taken, assaulted, murdered, and that the building had been deliberately burned in an attempt to erase evidence. They knew the offenders had tried to leave behind nothing that could identify them. But for decades, they did not know who was responsible. The absence of a confirmed offender shaped every part of the investigation. It affected the families waiting for answers, the detectives who continued searching, and the community that remembered one of Austin's darkest nights. The eventual identification of Robert Eugene Brasher's through DNA evidence brought a conclusion that had seemed impossible for many years. Yet the journey to that conclusion also revealed important lessons about evidence, investigative responsibility, and the lasting impact of unresolved crimes. The story of this case was never only about finding a suspect. It was also about understanding how justice must continue evolving when new information challenges. Old conclusions. From the beginning, the case demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence. When investigators entered the burned remains of the yogurt shop in 1991, they were working under extremely difficult circumstances. The fire had destroyed much of the physical environment. Objects that might have revealed the movements of the offender had been damaged or lost. Biological evidence had been exposed to extreme conditions. The scene that remained was incomplete, forcing investigators to build their understanding for fragments. However, among those fragments were pieces of evidence that would survive for decades. The DNA recovered from the scene became the most important example of why evidence preservation matters. At the time, investigators could not use it to identify the person responsible. The technology required to fully analyze the sample simply did not exist. But instead of disappearing into history, the evidence remained available for future scientific examination. More than 30 years later, advances in DNA analysis transformed that preserved material into the central element of the investigation. The case demonstrated that an unanswered question today may become answerable tomorrow. The development of investigative genetic genealogy changed the possibilities of cold case investigations across the United States. It allowed investigators to examine genetic relationships and identify individuals connected to crime scene evidence in ways that were impossible during earlier decades. In the yogurt shop murders, that technology provided the breakthrough that traditional investigative methods had failed to achieve. The DNA evidence identified Robert Eugene Brasher's, and further analysis supported the connection through ballistic evidence involving a firearm associated with him. For investigators, the discovery represented the culmination of years of work and scientific progress. It provided a level of certainty that had never existed during previous stages of the case. At the same time, the resolution of the case also required acknowledging the mistakes made along the way. The investigation involving Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce became one of the most significant examples of how a criminal case can move in the wrong direction despite the sincere efforts of investigators. The pressure surrounding the murders was enormous. For teenagers had been killed in an especially violent attack, and the public wanted answers. Investigators were searching for a way to explain a crime that appeared to have been carefully designed to prevent identification. When suspects emerged and confessions were obtained, the possibility of resolution seemed close. However, later reviews showed that those confessions could not withstand comparison with the physical evidence. Contradictions appeared, and the reliability of the statements became increasingly questioned. The eventual exoneration of the four men was not simply a legal formality. It represented recognition that the pursuit of justice requires the courage to correct previous conclusions when evidence proves they were wrong. Criminal investigations depend on human judgment, and human judgment can be affected by pressure, incomplete information, and the understandable desire to find answers after a devastating crime. The yogurt shop case became an example of why every piece of evidence must be examined carefully and why no single type of evidence should automatically outweigh objective facts. Confessions, witness memories, and theories all have value, but they must be tested against the physical evidence available. The case also highlighted the devastating consequences that can occur when innocent people become connected to a crime they did not commit. Even after their legal situations were corrected, the years spent under suspicion could never be fully returned. Their experiences became part of the broader history of the investigation and demonstrated that justice includes protecting the innocent as well as identifying the guilty. The financial settlement reached with the city of Austin acknowledged the serious impact of those wrongful accusations. Yet the emotional consequences extended far beyond any legal resolution. Time lost, reputations damaged, and personal struggles created by the accusations were realities that compensation alone could not erase. While the identification of Brasher's answered a central question, it did not provide a complete explanation of every detail surrounding the crime. Some mysteries remain beyond the reach of available evidence. The possibility of an accomplice continues to be one of the most important unanswered questions. Investigators confirmed Brasher's connection to the crime scene, but they could not determine whether another individual participated. The use of 2 firearms, the presence of multiple victims, and witness reports of suspicious individuals before closing all contributed to continuing uncertainty. However, responsible investigation requires separating what is known from what remains possible. The evidence identifies Brasher's. It does not definitively identify anyone else. The same principle applies to the question of motive. The offender or offenders stole money from the yogurt shop, but the amount taken does not fully explain the violence that followed. The crime involved robbery, sexual assault, murder, and arson, creating a complex sequence of actions that cannot be reduced to a single simple explanation. Investigators know what occurred, but they cannot know with certainty what motivated those actions. This limitation is common in cases where the offender cannot be questioned or were critical. Evidence has been destroyed. Robert Eugene Brasher's died, in 1999 during a confrontation with police. Because of that, the investigation reached a point where evidence could identify him, but no interview could provide additional answers. He could not explain his actions, identify possible accomplices, or reveal whether he had information about other crimes. His death ensured that some questions surrounding the yogurt shop murders would remain unanswered permanently. For the families of the victims, that reality is especially difficult. Knowing who was connected to the crime provides a measure of closure, but it cannot replace the opportunity to hear explanations directly from the person responsible. The final chapter of the yogurt shop murders is therefore not a story of complete resolution. It is a story of partial answers achieved through extraordinary persistence. It is a story of scientific advancement, investigative endurance, and the importance of continuing to search even when decades pass without success. Most importantly, it is a story about remembering the victims. Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers should not be remembered only as names connected to a criminal case. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and young people whose lives contained possibilities that were never realized. Their families lost more than loved ones on December 6, 1991. They lost futures, memories, and countless moments that should have existed. The investigation that followed was important because it sought accountability, but the purpose of justice was always connected to honoring those 4 lives. More than 30 years later, the yogurt shop murders remain one of the most significant cold cases in American criminal history. The case revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the justice system. It showed how evidence can survive beyond the limitations of its era, how science can transform impossible questions into answers, and how important it is to correct mistakes when the truth becomes clearer. It also showed that some wounds created by violent crime never fully disappear. The identification of Robert Eugene Brashers brought an end to one search, but it did not erase the tragedy. The names Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers remain the heart of this story. Their lives, not the crime itself, are what deserve to be remembered. The yogurt shop murders stand as a reminder that justice may take years, sometimes generations, to reach its destination. But the pursuit of truth continues because every victim matters, every unanswered question matters, and every effort to uncover what happened represents a commitment to remembering those who can no longer speak for themselves.